Thanks, Barbara. Yeah,
Okay.
we're really excited to be here. We're really excited about this joining with Braver Angels. We have a lot in common, I think, between Public Democracy LA and just the movement for our civic assembly and Braver Angels. So just as a little bit of background, Public Democracy Los Angeles is a volunteer-run coalition. Our goal is to make a more equitable, representative, and responsive culture of democracy in Los Angeles. So I'll be presenting along with two fellow PDLA volunteers, Wayne Liebman and Michelle Dennis. Michelle worked for almost 40 years in Southern California local government budget and finance positions, and I'll explain more about how relevant that is halfway through this presentation. And Wayne founded Public Access Democracy and co-founded PDLA, and is a physician by trade, playwright, and activist. So we're going to start off with a brief overview of PDLA and what a civic assembly is, and then move into why we think civic assemblies are important for LA and some of the ways that they could be useful here. And then we'll kind of close it out with a few remarks, kind of summing up why we're really excited about this. So I'm gonna move forward. So our mission is to build civic spaces where Angelinos co-create solutions with their heads, hands, and hearts. Our main focus, though, is to bring a civic assembly to LA by 2026. Some of you may have heard about civic assemblies, some may not have, and that's fine. They're happening all over the world, including they've happened in California, and they go by a lot of different names. Some people call them citizen assemblies, panels, citizen juries, lottery selected panels, and any kind of combination of those terms. They're all used. But by any name, the purpose is to convene a diverse group of people to deliberate on a crucial public matter. And the reason we're so excited about this is we really think that there's a new future for democracy. We can do this in LA. It doesn't need to operate as the status quo. And the reason this is important is because surveys show that Angelinos are getting tired of the way things are currently going. They think big money has too much influence. People think that they themselves have too little influence. And in general, there seems to be some agreement that there needs to be some kind of governance reforms. And this is where civic assemblies can come into play. All of us, I think, are familiar with this, but just to help set the scene, traditional community engagement. Most civic engagement avenues, they emphasize raising issues without progressing towards solutions. If you think about a town hall, a lot of times that kind of operates like that, with the loudest voices dominating the discussion, and barriers like time, cost, and general lack of interest make it so most of the public doesn't even bother to come. And so we want to change that. Civic assemblies are designed to empower we the people to solve the tough public problems and to bridge divides. This is kind of a broad overview of what exactly we're talking about when we talk about a civic assembly. The process begins with democratic lotteries, which fundamentally change who is brought into the decision-making room. It allows for new voices and a vastly more representative cross-section of the community to have a seat at the table. Then at the assembly itself, that's the second part, there's balanced and robust information. Assembly members partake in high quality deliberation, they balance trade-offs, and they come up with as many best solutions for as many people as possible. And the result are these really creative and durable solutions to some of the toughest problems. In addition, barriers like time, cost, and access are addressed through stipends and support, making it more accessible to everyone to attend. And just going to take a second to really dive into those two components that we think make a civic assembly really unique, which is democratic lotteries and in-depth deliberation. This combination is what makes it so people from different backgrounds come together. It emphasizes learning and collaborative problem solving, and it ends up with these really evidence-based policy recommendations that local government or national government or whatever level of government can actually use. So first, democratic lottery. One of the unique components of a civic assembly is that those in the room roughly mirror the composition of a community. That means that if anyone in a community looks at a civic assembly happening in their area, that they should be able to kind of see themselves in there. They feel like it represents them and their voice is represented. And there's three main steps of how that happens. The first is that there needs to be a clearly defined problem, and also that a concerned geographic population. And demographic targets are set. So this could be for aspects such as race, ethnicity, educational attainment, gender, political affiliation. So it's whatever is needed in order to make sure that those in the room really represent different voices and different perspectives on an issue. Next, the government sends out an invitation to 10 to 20,000 randomly selected addresses in the space. And everyone who's at that address who meets whatever criteria is set is encouraged to apply. And oftentimes this is how you get those people who've never participated in a similar process before, or maybe even any kind of public process before. And then at the end, there's a selection event to make it really exciting. Like, congratulations, you won the lottery. You get to join a civic assembly. And then so in the actual deliberation process, there's a few things that we think makes this also unique. First, there's a well-balanced group of background experts and stakeholders, oftentimes from universities, that give the panelists the lay of the land. So they give that initial set of information so the panel really understands the issue at a deep level. They're also given information about cognitive bias and critical thinking, and the panel hears from stakeholders from all sides. So this could be academics, people who've experienced the problem, different advocacy groups, whoever is relevant for the conversation. And the idea is that the assembly members should not feel like they're being spoon-fed anything. It really is meant as an opportunity for them to ask questions, to probe, and sometimes to even call in their own experts if there's something that they feel like is missing. We often call this a learning phase. After they start learning, they start to deliberate. And we say it's a linear process, but really it goes back and forth quite a bit between learning and deliberation, because as you deliberate, you have more questions a lot of times. But they start deliberating on all the information they learned. They go out, they do their own research, they sort through the different values concerned, and they participate in an iterative yes and process to consider as many options as possible. And throughout this process, there's also check-ins with city staff to make sure that the panel is getting feedback on how they're progressing and don't really veer too far off course. And then the panel themselves get to actually write the recommendations and share it with the policymakers. Many people react and say, this is crazy, like this is a pipe dream. There's no way this could really happen. But there have been over 600 civic assemblies all over the world in the past 20 years and more every year. Civic assemblies have been incorporated as a permanent governmental structure in Paris, Brussels, East Belgium, with more on the way. And it's happening because it's really working. People are perfectly capable when given time and resources and structure of making smart policy decisions that solve the toughest public problems. Some long-term outcomes, just to kind of throw them out there, that we've seen as the impact of these civic assemblies. People learn more about the topic, more about other perspectives. It builds civic skills that are really critical for society. I know that Braver Angels also has a lot of these skill building components. It can build social cohesion. A lot of times it's been shown that people who participated in the civic assembly that had never done that before end up going out into other types of democratic participation as well. So it doesn't just end in the room. It kind of inspires more mobilization. It can build trust and transparency and community building. Okay, so what does all this mean for LA? I think that's probably what's on a lot of people's minds of like, how can this really be applied? So there's 4 areas we're gonna touch on briefly. The first is charter reform, the second is neighborhood councils, the third is redistricting commission, and the fourth is community input. So charter reform is a big one. Challenges of the previous charter reform showed that getting the composition of the commission right is really important. And there are actually 2 separate competing commissions, an appointed and an elected commission. But people who are appointed need to have insider connections, and people who are elected needed to be able to get endorsements and raise money. So it's not accessible for the average person who doesn't make it their career. A paid charter reform commission, which would be selected by lottery, would be more representative and independent than previous commissions. So that's one example. A second is neighborhood councils, and this is kind of a 2-tiered way that it could be applied. The first is that, well, in general, neighborhood councils are intended to serve as the neighborhood's voice. But sometimes they can add another layer of bureaucracy, and it can still be dominated by particular viewpoints. So neighborhood councils could really serve as the voice of their community with true representation through this kind of lottery selection, which would help provide a statistically valid cross-section. On the flip side, we are presented at the Neighborhood Congress, and another way the neighborhood councils have seen as civic assembly as being exciting is to solve some of the issues that are pressing in their community, to better engage the community in these discussions. A lot of times when conversations come up, they have their monthly town halls or their quarterly town halls, and not many people come and give their opinions. So they can use this civic assembly model in order to bring in new voices and to deliberate things like, where should be pedestrian only, or like where should bike lanes be, things that are, where should a traffic light be, things that are really pressing in their community that need more community input in order to really get local ownership into the solution. The next one is redistricting commission. So Under the current system laid out in the city charter, city elected officials appoint members to the redistricting panel, who then act as their proxies. And this council is the one who has the final say over approving the maps. An independent commission would help make sure that the district maps being adopted by the panel and filed with the city elections official are not based on the elected officials' best route to victory. So the principle is that elected officials should not have the power to choose their voters, which could be a system ripe for corruption, and rather would restore the power to the people to really be able to elect the representatives they choose. And then the final piece we want to mention is the community input. And this is when governments ask people in the community to tell their opinions on an issue. We've been talking to a lot of different local government, city council, neighborhood councils, advocacy groups, other organizations in the sphere to kind of get us an idea of what exactly this community input might look like. What are the issues that people in LA are really caring about? And the reason that this is important is because lottery selection would make the community input more representative of the community. It would allow for more deliberation of facts and information and would just make it a more productive way of making decisions in the area. So some examples that have come up multiple times are around affordable housing and homelessness, around public transportation, climate action and adaptation, wildfire response and prevention, which, as a quick plug, we will be doing a model assembly about that in the beginning of June that you guys are all welcome and encouraged to join. We'll talk about that more in a second. And then a participatory assembly for budgeting. So this last one is what Michelle will talk about now as an example of how an existing process, participatory budgeting, can be improved through integrating a civic assembly model. So as mentioned, Michelle worked for almost 40 years in Southern California local government budget and finance positions. She retired in 2003 after serving for 20 years as the director of finance for the city of Santa Monica. She's taught public budgeting and finance at UCLA and USC and in Brazil. And I'm going to turn it over to you, Michelle.
Okay, well, good evening, everybody. My voice may sound a little strange. My wife and I have been recovering from flu, so if you'll bear with me, you'll understand why my voice is not coming through strongly. When you stop and think about it, the budget process is strategic for all government operations. It's like the heart that pumps the blood, that's the money, to all of the different programs and activities to provide services to our citizens, our residents. Before we dive into participatory budgeting, one more point to know is when the modern budgeting in the United States was formed in the first decade of the 20th century, from that point on, effectively citizens have been locked out of the main budget process and having a meaningful role in deciding how resources get allocated to services that directly impact their lives. So what I'm about to present to you is how to bring some strengths of participatory budgeting, which is another deliberative democracy tool like citizens assemblies or civic assemblies, bring the strengths of that process into civic assemblies and form what I call a participatory assembly for budgeting. But first, participatory budgeting. It's been in existence for like 30 years. It's been adopted all over the world. And in essence, what the governing, say, city council does is they set aside a given dollar amount and they tell a borough or a council district, here's this money. You folks decide how you want to spend it. And our staff will help you figure that out. So the process starts with designing the process where a steering committee of citizens or residents in that particular councilmanic district, for example, get together a city staff and design a process. The first step of that process is brainstorming. That is thinking about ideas for spending that specific dollar amount, that limited dollar amount, that would provide value to that particular neighborhood or councilmanic district. The next step is to develop proposals, and city staff work with volunteers from the people who've come on their own to participate in this process. And then proposals are put together and they are screened by the city staff for feasibility. And then a subset of those proposals that go through that process are presented to the residents in say a councilmanic district or even the whole city, and they vote, and the top projects are approved by the city to be funded from the set amount of dollars set aside. Now, this is a major step forward to bring everyday citizens and residents into the process of deciding how to allocate resources. Next slide, please. So to remind you, a civic or citizens assembly process is usually created to deal with a sticky or wicked public policy problem. And it's really three phases. One is the recruitment of the participants. And as Alex was saying, invitations are sent out, and then there's a random selection from the people who respond so that the ending assembly group is representative of the demographics of the city. There's a second process part, which is learning, deliberation, decision making. And I want to emphasize what happens here is learning. So the participants learn all about the issue that they've been asked to deal with. They can bring in experts from the outside. They can bring in city staff. Then there's deliberation. This is not opinion setting, it's deliberation in small groups and in larger groups to find a common solution to that issue that an overwhelming majority of the participants can agree on. And then there's a final vote on the recommendations that they come up with. And then those recommendations are sent to the city council, for example, for a decision if they're going to accept them and implement them. Next slide, please. Now, okay, would you, yes. So there are some strengths in this civic assemblies process and the participatory budgeting process, which I propose to bring together to form what I call a participatory assembly for budgeting. So the first one is sortition. That is the random selection of representatives to participate who represent the demographics of that area. Next. There are as I said, there are learning sessions, briefings, presentations, question and answer sessions, where the participants who have been selected dive in. And then there's deliberation, consideration of options and trade-offs, and then finding common ground, preparing recommendations. And that's the civic assemblies. The participatory budgeting process, one of its strengths, it involves a large group. Everybody in that councilmanic district or that portion of the city or the entire city is invited to participate. So for example, the city of New York just completed, well, they will complete in 2 months, their 8th or 9th process of participatory budgeting. And they allowed everyone from age 11 up to participate in the process. Second strength is partnerships. So the participants team up with the professional staff and elected staff to discuss what's possible. Next. And then those people who show up and participate begin to brainstorm ideas about how to spend the amount of money that's been set aside for them to consider. And then a proposal is developed. Now, what would happen if these strengths were combined together and a randomly selected, demographically represented group of people were involved in a meaningful way in the city's main budget process? So the way this would work is the city would select a functional service area, such as police or parks and recreation, or multiple areas to be considered by the participatory assembly for budgeting. Next. The city would break down the functional service area or areas into discrete on-the-ground services already provided. Now, what I mean by that is, for example, in police services, there are at least 15 major specific services that police departments typically provide. Usually, up to now, when citizens have been asked to set priorities between functional service areas, they don't get down to the individual on the ground specific services. Then city staff sends a survey to all city residents asking them to prioritize services already provided. That's the detailed on the ground services. And to list possible new services to be provided that, if provided, would make a real difference in their life. Next. Then elected officials create a participatory assembly for budgeting using sortition to randomly select a representative sample of citizens' residents. And their job is to consider the prioritized services, the results of the survey that everybody in the city has filled out, and the listing of possible new services, and try to come up with a combined listing. Then the participatory assembly for budgeting deliberates and integrates into one master prioritized list services already provided which are to be kept. And that's the key item. Perhaps those at the lower end of the prioritized list are going to be let go, and those new services which are wanted. So the job of the participatory assembly for budgeting is to combine those two listings into one prioritized list. Then the participants in the public assembly for budgeting ask city staff to determine the financial cost of the new combined master list of services. And then finally, the participatory assembly for budgeting presents their new master list of services for inclusion in the city budget at a public hearing. Now, let me say one more fact. This is very important. Usually what drives the main city budget process is some projection of what revenues they think will be available. Obviously, in this process, citizens may come up with a list of prioritized services that they think are important, and new ones that they want to be created so that they can connect with on a lived basis in their everyday life. It's possible that the cost of those services are going to exceed what had previously been budgeted for that functional area in the prior year. Usually what this means in the past is the city would say, well, we have to cut back on what's going to be provided to fit the revenues. Then the city council alternatively here would ask the question, what are you citizens willing to pay for? What are the trade-offs? So if we said, yes, we'll go 10% above what was budgeted before, we ask you to reprioritize your list, or we're going to give you a list of possible new revenue sources, and you come back to us and tell us what you're willing to embrace. This is a dramatic shift in the way the city budgets services. So that's it. That was a run through the participatory assembly for budgeting process. To date, no city has adopted a version of this. However, I have been in conversation with the chairperson of the LA City Council committee for the budget process. And I met with her at her request, and we discussed elements of this process and how to dramatically increase citizen participation, transparency, and accountability in the budget process. And it's also being under deliberation and consideration by my local city. And I'm in one of the kitchen cabinets of one of the council members that I supported. So the real threshold question is, what city is going to be the first one to adopt a process like this and really finally open the gate for citizen participation, resident participation in the main city budget process? So now we're going to have some concluding words by Wayne.
Can I just make a comment? If you're not, anybody that's not presenting, you can just mute yourself to get rid of background noise. I think that would be really helpful. Appreciate that. Sorry, Wayne, go ahead.
Oh, that's okay. Okay. Thank you, Michelle, and thanks, Alex, for putting up that slide. I just have one slide. This is it. And the guy on the left is Adam Michnik, and he was the thinker behind the Solidarity movement in Poland in the 1980s. And I'm going to have more to say about that in a moment. I do want to read the poem by Juan Ramon Jimenez. I have the feeling that my boat has struck down there in the depths against a great thing, and nothing happens. Nothing. Silence. Waves. Nothing happens? Or has everything happened? And are we standing now, quietly, in the new life? So, in a representative democracy, there's two ways to do representation: elected assemblies and allotted assemblies. Elected assemblies are elected, like a city council or Congress. Allotted assemblies are chosen by lot, a civic assembly, and they bring ordinary people to the center of action. Now, some of you may be thinking at this point, well, these are interesting ideas, but can we really apply this to governance? For example, was there ever a time in world history where a country was governed by a allotted assembly? Well, yes, there was. Ancient Athens. The Athenians even invented an ingenious machine, the claritarian, to conduct random selection in the agora. And with that, they produced a citizen-centered state that had invested in human, social, and material resources, laying the foundation for Western art, sport, science, mathematics, drama, history, and philosophy. It was a flowering unequaled in history, and it came about because they did democracy that way. Our current governance is based on elections. In my view, elections, which ought to be about finding the best people to solve our problems, are often not about that. Elections are often a power struggle between political parties, and that's a weird thing to call democracy. Elected officials are just people, and people have the potential for good and bad. When you design governance, you want a system that encourages people to be good. Allotted assemblies do this by setting aside politics, propaganda, parties, power dynamics, potential for bribery and corruption, and letting ordinary people sit down together to solve problems. Elections don't quite do that. They're about keeping one party or the other in power. And ask anyone who has been elected to office, and they'll tell you about the distractions of fundraising they need to go through to get reelected. That's not helpful for solving problems. I want to close with a little story. Some years ago, when Poland was still behind the Iron Curtain, a movement for Polish independence arose. It was called Solidarity. If you're old enough, you remember it. The leaders of Solidarity knew that they could not prevail against Soviet tanks, so they took a radical imaginative leap, and that was Adam Michnik's breakthrough. They said, your tanks don't matter. We are simply going to act as if we are already living in the new reality of Polish freedom. They organized on that basis. They electrified the nation, and Soviet power collapsed. You can look it up. That's the magic of as if. That's what civic assemblies are. They're a radical act of imagination. They say to the old order, money and power don't matter. We're not outsourcing our authority. The assembly sits at a table outside, in spite of, or simply apart from top-down politics, where the usual political structures, debate, conflict, careerism, power struggles, don't operate. The panel says, we're going to bring our lived experience to bear, finding the best ideas by listening to experts and then talking to each other, just solving the problem as if what we say and what we decide really matters, because we have given ourselves that authority. There's no tank, there's no amount of money or entrenched power that can prevail against that simple act. Braver Angels is sort of doing this now. You guys have been designing a new way of governance. So thanks for listening, and I think it's time for questions. Let's open it up.
Do you want to take down the slides now so we can do the questions interactively and then can show that last slide again? Okay, Rhett.
Cool. Well, thanks everybody. This is amazing. Well, no problem stealing my idea. I've been talking about this kind of thing for years, but no, I won't charge you for it. But what a better, I can't think of a better organization to help spearhead this. And is Braver Angels truly spearheading this, or is this some kind of a partnership with another organization that's leading this? I mean, Braver Angels has all these, depolarization and common ground workshops. I mean, what a better way to help, this assembly help deliberate, because I can imagine those deliberations getting pretty heated. But if people are skilled with some of the Braver Angels, the Braver way, that's going to make things so much easier and more productive.
It's definitely collaboration. The idea, I don't want to offend you, Rhett, but the idea is actually PDLA's idea on creating this model, or they may have plagiarized it from elsewhere, from ancient Athens. But it doesn't matter whose idea it was. It's a good idea, and it's really a collaboration of two organizations, very complementary skills, and we're really excited to be working with them. And Rhett is one of our leaders in Orange County, so I can see the wheels turning. And
This is an awesome
spearheading
idea.
something down
This
there.
is, yeah, thank you, Barbara. This is an awesome idea.
Michael.
I agree that this is an awesome idea. And referring to this example of Polish solidarity, we can just do this. But the first step probably would be to create some space, maybe online, that would provide us kind of shared repository of this best experience of what other people maybe already tried, what they achieved. And I can give you an example of this. There is this organization called Fix Us or Fix US, and they compiled this, what they called solutions landscape. So this is actually a Google Doc that summarized many of different ideas for democracy, like election reforms and say different ways of voting and so on. And it was even open for comments. Maybe it's closed now, I'm not sure. Maybe it's still open. So if you could do something like this, maybe using Braver Angels resources and have this shared place, and that would act like a catalyst. So for different people who are interested in this idea, different alliances who want to work together to implement this. So this is what I think we are missing still. That we don't have this mechanism of cooperative development of this kind of ideas.
Michael, thank you. I put a link in the chat to the website of Democracy R&D, which is an international organization of, I think 100 different practitioners and people in the space that are doing deliberative democracy and assemblies. And that site is a real repository of information about what's going on. If you scroll down to the bottom, they just have a report about what happened in 2024, what's going on all over the world, including what's happening in the U.S. So yeah, the space is just getting organized here in the United States, but it's very well organized in other countries, especially in Europe.
And just to
Okay,
add,
that's great. Thank you.
just want to quickly add to that. Well, one, David is here, who is head of the Democracy R&D. So thanks, David, for joining. And also to mention that that's part of why we wanted to do this with Braver Angels. There's the very traditional civic assembly model in some ways. That's like what we're advocating for on a larger scale. But we also want to figure out with Braver Angels the best way kind of like getting at what you were talking about earlier in terms of merging it with some of what is already happening with Braver Angels. So that's kind of the beginning of that conversation in some ways as well, in terms of how it fits within Braver Angels.
Michelle, did you want to comment on that question as well?
Yes, very briefly, having taught public budgeting and finance for 21 years at UCLA to masters in public policy students, I was struck continually by how do you involve and meaningfully ordinary citizens? And then I spoke with the person who led a national citizens assembly in Ireland. And what the issue they dealt with is abortion in a Catholic country. The legislators in the country have been unable for years to come to any resolution. The Citizens Assembly dove into the issue, came up with recommendations that the legislative leaders approved, and it was submitted to the electorate, and over 2/3 of the electorate approved the recommendations. Now, that's something that wouldn't have happened strictly in the legislative process, and I was blown away.
And also, could you share your presentation with us, the slides?
Yeah, we can send the slides out after the meeting this evening, or maybe you can put a link in chat to the slides, if there's possible.
Okay,
If they're
thank you.
Google Slides. If it's too hard, we can send it out afterwards.
Mhm.
Okay. Arend.
Yeah, thank you for the presentation. I've heard about citizen assemblies before, but never kind of like taken time to dive into it. So yeah, I really appreciated this to learn about it and learn more. I was particularly intrigued by the idea of using it for neighborhood councils. For I think I've been asked to. I've heard about neighborhood council elections, but I haven't really participated in them. And imagine that it's just really hard to get drive turnout for those. So I like this idea of citizen assemblies for low turnout elections to kind of get, it feels like a better process of being represented than trying to actually drive turnout high enough to get proper representation. So that was my biggest thought from it. But I was curious, like once we end up in a world where we have citizen assemblies for charter commission, neighborhood assemblies, all neighborhood councils, all these things. Do you see this going all the way to like our like federal elections and all elections, or do you see like a certain limit where it makes sense to kind of use elections for different other scenarios?
There's a spectrum of advocacy. Most of the assemblies that have happened so far have been advisory. But there is one case where they actually gave political power to a randomly selected body, and that's the Michigan Redistricting Commission. There are 13 people on that commission, and they took there was an amendment, a state amendment in the city of Michigan, and they took redistricting out of the hands of the legislature, and they gave it to 13 randomly chosen citizens. If you pick a legislative body, let's pick a large body, like say a state legislature, it would not look like the state legislature now. If that became an allotted assembly, it would look like more like what the Paris assembly looks like. There's a permanent standing assembly in the city of Paris. It's not the whole government, it's a part of the government, also in East Belgium, also in Brussels. And what that assembly does in Paris is it identifies issues that need to be addressed. And then there are nested assemblies. It spins off assemblies just to address those issues. And that's probably how, if you did this at the level of a legislature, it would work that way. I think so. That's kind of my quick answer to that question. There is bipartisan endorsement, I'm noticing in the chat. Yeah, it's especially when you're talking about stuff that happens in a municipal level and people have to decide about land use and fire prevention and garbage collection and things like that. It's completely bipartisan. It's just, it doesn't compute to be partisan, but I think that the assemblies could address really tough issues where there is a lot of partisanship. And personally, I don't believe in progressivism. I don't believe in conservatism. I believe in people. I think people, any group of people, can sit down and address a problem as people become educated about it and come up with a really smart solution.
Thank you, Wayne. We'll go to Patrick and then George.
Thanks, and I apologize. I was on the wrong link for a while, so I missed the first 10 minutes. Just full disclosure, I'm up in Northern California, but I'm a big civic assembly advocate up here, and I'm staying connected with the LA contingent, PDLA especially, because folks up here are watching closely and hopefully going to follow in footsteps. When I was first introduced to Braver Angels quite a few years back, when I was not temporarily, but serving a short term on the Democracy Without Elections Board, which is another advocacy organization for civic assemblies, we were introduced to Braver Angels as an organization that was largely trying to bridge the gap between liberal and conservative people in the country right now. And I just wondered if are there some, is it broader than that, and are there some Braver Angels people here who could speak to that? Because for the sortition part of the equation to work, to get that representative body onto the assembly, it's really not a balanced number of liberals and conservatives, as Wayne just said. It stratifies across a whole bunch of different demographics, and I just wondered if anyone on the Braver Angels side wanted to speak to that a little bit. Thank you.
I'm probably the designated speaker. It's difficult. Actually, we're having a little bit of this conversation right before we started the meeting. How to make things truly representative. In Braver Angels, we have certain events where we require equal representation of both parties, and in some events, equal representation of people on different sides of issues. But I think the key to making this work and really functional in a way that's acceptable to everyone is to really get the distribution right. And that is, I think, something that PDLA has really cracked the code on better than Braver Angels in a way. And that's something that we really need to explore in future discussions, how to get that right representation. So it's not, and it's not always going to be just two sides. It's going to be multiple sides of an issue that need to be brought together. So I don't think I completely answered your question, but it is something that we definitely are thinking about. I don't know, Alex or Wayne or Michelle, do you have anything to add?
Patrick does. Just to be, I guess, maybe taking a step back to be clear. So Public Democracy, PDLA, is one organization that is advocating for a civic assembly. There's like a host of others across the country in different cities, internationally, and they all have this, what Barbara, what you're talking about in terms of how that selection process works. So just to kind of be clear about that.
The modern idea is about 50 years old. It was actually invented by Ned Crosby in Minnesota way back in the 70s. He had these civic juries, and it was actually it was invented simultaneously in Germany. And of course, the original idea came from the Greeks.
We'll go to George.
Hi, I also need to apologize. I was on a bad link for the first 15 minutes of this discussion until Wayne sent me a better link. Two things to add. One of them from Michelle when she said that she was unsure that this is being done anywhere. I'm under the impression there are several Mexican towns, one of which is Monterey, that has been doing participative budgeting. And the way that that's kind of limited is they give a fixed amount of money for people to vote on, and it's not a huge amount, but people essentially set priorities for for some amount that the city council feels they can afford to play with. But this is being done in some places. I have some information somewhere, but I don't have it at my fingertips. Second thing is, somebody asked, can this work at a higher level like a federal? It probably could, in fact, very well, but it would have to be sort of test driven at a lower level before you do that. And when you go to lower level situations, it has a bunch of other advantages, because for a lot of small towns and small jurisdictions in the US, or even in Los Angeles County, they're in a news desert. There's really no media coverage of the actions of a city council or any candidates, and there's no monitoring of candidates. So people vote rather blindly, and there's a club of people who essentially run the city. I lived in a town called Norwalk that functioned that way. But a statistically selected assembly or a sortitioned assembly would be physically representative of the people, and they would know the issues that they are voting on because they're living with them. And they wouldn't be able to do anything to get themselves reelected because there would be another sortition. So if, let's say, you have a group of people and you rotate through it, in other words, you have some let's say you only replace half the people each term, then it develops a institutional memory, but it is physically the people who are in the town, and nobody has to decide who agrees with them because the statistics will make everything agree. So I would say for small places, it works much better, would have much less resistance, avoids corruption and incumbency issues. And if it works in a lot of small places, higher jurisdictions might try to do it. So I think that it would be most logical to start at a low end to get people familiar with the process and to know how it works, and then they might support it at higher and higher levels. Thank you.
Just
And that is actually a really good segue, because we are planning to have a model event on June 7th, which some of you may know about, and you'll all be getting invitations to that. But I think there is a learning process, not only about the issues in executing a civic assembly, but a learning process of how to hold these civic assemblies as well.
Barbara, I just want to add very briefly, build on what George communicated. Yes, participatory budgeting has been invented in Brazil 30 years ago, and it's been utilized in 7,000 jurisdictions around the world. However, it only deals with a dollar amount allocated to the community. It does not facilitate citizens, residents participating in a decision-making role, a meaningful role in the main budget process. And that's what a participatory assembly for budgeting will do.
Thank you. We have Michael, and then Rhett, and then I just have a quick question myself. And I think I know the answer to this, but in Braver Angels, we want to make an impact on the country, we want to depolarize. And we often wrestle with the question, do we try to go after institutions to work with them to depolarize institutions, or do we work at the grassroots level to depolarize people at the grassroots level? Basically a top-down versus sort of a bottom-up approach to depolarization. This seems to me to be very much in the grassroots camp, which I prefer, because I agree with Wayne. I think we are America. We are the governing body of the country. But is there documented evidence that holding civic assemblies and depolarizing at the grassroots level filters up to change the nature of institutions and how leaders of those institutions communicate and deal with one another?
Yes, can I, maybe I'll start if that's okay, because I think that one thing that I would want to mention, I guess, is that it is grassroots in the sense that it is the everyday person who is part of the assembly. At the same time, though, there's a lot of advocacy that goes ahead of the assembly to get buy-in from whatever government is the one that has some kind of say. So if we're talking about LA, the most effective LA civic assembly would have buy-in from the city council or from whatever agencies and departments are relevant for that issue. So it does kind of merge the two in some ways, but it is a grassroots effort in the sense that it is citizen driven, and that a lot of the ones in the US haven't been fully endorsed by government, but a lot of the ones in Europe are usually endorsed by some kind of government in order to that the government says, like, we'll at least listen to your recommendations and let you know what we think about the recommendations. So it is supposed to kind of tie the two together.
Yeah, interesting.
Right.
That's something.
I had my personal experience of one of the citizens' assemblies that I actually attended, not as a participant, but as an observer, was the Petaluma Assembly, which was in 2022, I think was Petaluma. And it was a land use problem that they had there. And some of the city council people just walked away from this saying, God, this is the way we should do business. This is great. So yes, I do think it can affect. If people are interested more in their own political careers and their own political success and are interested in power, citizen assembly might be a threat. But there are other people that are electeds who see that these assemblies actually help them. They take the heat for really difficult problems that often an elected body just can't make any progress on. It's just too polarized. And then they get all the credit. And the nice thing about an assembly is, like the one in Ireland that Michelle mentioned, the assembly voted, 2/3 of the assembly made these recommendations. And then the parliament, put it to a referendum. 2/3 of the country, same vote as was in the citizen assembly, approved of the measures. So there's sort of a built-in buy-in when you have an assembly. And that's really important also to elected officials.
Thank you. Let's see, we have 3 hands raised. Bonnie hasn't spoken yet, so we'll go to Bonnie first, and then Michael, and then Rhett, and then we're just about at the top of the hour. I'm willing to stay a little bit longer to answer people's questions, but I
This
don't
will
want
be quick, just to say, remember, folks, change takes time. And oftentimes it's not easy. Some of us have had our lifelong patterns, and to go like this and change it, hey, that would be cool. But change takes time and patience. And I envy you younger folk who will get to see these changes. Folks like myself who are up there in years, don't know. But
we can always hope.
hang
Bonnie.
in there, persist, be patient. Don't let your egos take over, let your heart take over, and let's carry on. And thank you all.
Thank you, Bonnie. Okay, Michael, and then Rhett.
So a quick question. If you're selecting the assembly by lottery, how would you ensure that it will fairly represent not just the demographic diversity of population, but the diversity of opinions, perspectives, like NIMBY versus YIMBY opposition, for instance, in housing. They belong to the same demographic group, but their positions are different. So how to ensure that it will fairly represent this kind of diversity?
So the larger the assembly, then the more you can do real randomization. You don't have to do a 2-step process if there's enough people. And when you pick by random, just about every view gets represented. That's the beauty of it. If it's a smaller assembly, you do have to do what's called stratification, and you pick certain parameters, and usually they don't have anything to do with opinions about things. Although in the case of the Michigan Redistricting Commission, they did sort. They wanted to have 4 Democrats and 4 Republicans on that commission, and then they wanted to have the rest of them be independent. So they did sort by opinion that way. But the commission, because they're just people, it all worked, and they accomplished their redistricting even though they had those opinions going in. So I don't know if that answers, but
yes, it's helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. Rhett?
Yeah, so several people already talked about this a little bit, so I think I know the answer, but my initial question was how much elected official endorsement does there need to make this happen? And it sounds like if we start at the smaller level and kind of grow bigger, we can have a little bit of pressure put on elected officials who might resist. And there could be some resistance, like was already mentioned, and there also might be some people who are like, no, let's just go for it. So has this been run by elected officials, and has there been positive feedback? Does anybody know?
Well, for example, the Petaluma Assembly, the city manager got so enthusiastic, she's just become an advocate after she saw this process work. And she's been in gatherings all over the country, just telling other city managers that you got to learn about this. This is really the best thing since chopped liver. It's really going to solve a lot of our problems. That's Peggy Flynn. So I don't know. That's one thing.
May add that a most recent citizens assembly was in Boulder, Colorado. And the city was so taken by the process that they've had their own staff get trained to facilitate citizens assemblies. So they bought in big time to deal with issues.
It's awesome. Thank you.
Orange.
If you wanted to adopt citizen assembly, let's say for the Charter Reform Commission, what is the process of getting there? Is that a ballot initiative? Do we need to advocate for a charter reform to adjust the charter reform process? What's the process?
Well, it's really complicated. We've gone through stages. At one point, we wrote a letter to the legal counsel for the city, advocating and this was before they went through the process of picking. The city council picked the Charter Reform Commission. But the legislative analyst said, we need to incorporate citizen assemblies in future discussions about, charter reform. It's a matter of really. So in LA, they pick it. The council does pick it. So there is a charter group that was not picked by lot. It was picked by the council and by the mayor. But the head of that commission is very interested in assemblies, and it's possible there could be an advisory assembly on various aspects of whatever that those guys are considering. The process is kind of stalled, but so it's stay tuned for how that's gonna happen. But I don't know. I hope that answers. It's really complicated. But right now, the power is in the city council's hands for that. And my opinion is it shouldn't be, because they're governed by the charter, and so their hands should be out of that, right? They shouldn't be able to do the charter. That it's just like you shouldn't be able to pick your districts. You should be out of that process of redistricting, because it's not the way to do it democratically. Yeah.
Okay, we keep getting hands, so a lot of interest. So George?
There's another model for doing this. A guy called James Fishkin at Stanford, who has run a number of these operations. What they usually do is they have an ad hoc assembly that's like picked randomly, and they kind of decide on a ballot proposition, and then the ballot proposition goes on the ballot. That requires less structural modification of a government body. You just because it's like once you have the ballot proposition, it's just like any other ballot proposition.
Michelle, you're muted.
Michelle, you're muted.
Yeah, one of the participants here was mentioning the difficulty of altering one's view as we age. So I can certainly resonate with that. I'm 82, and researching citizen assemblies all over the world, I came to one conclusion: they work.
I agree with that.
Unequivocally, they work. And
I'm
I just
104 and I agree with that.
shifted.
Aristotle is 2400 and he agrees
Yeah.
with it.
To close out, Alex, do you want to put up the slide with the link? We are, and Alex can describe it. We are going to be holding an in-person event in Los Angeles area, Culver City, on June 7th, which will model a civic assembly process. And you don't have to be from Los Angeles to attend that. You can register, just hold up your camera to this link, and I will be sending out a follow-up email also with the link to register.
To clarify, you're not, the event is not you come and watch a model assembly. You come, you are the assembly. Everybody that shows up is a participant. It's as if you were selected by lot. And then there'll be a real issue that we'll be deliberating about. Alex can say more about that.
I think you guys summed it up well. Yeah, so it's a 3-hour event on June 7th. Thank you, Susan, for putting it in the chat also, if that's easier. And the idea is that Braver Angels, like, you guys are very familiar with these kind of common grounds type of workshops, but it's new to a lot of people. So this is an opportunity for you to invite other people you know also, and for you to also see kind of more in depth what the differences might be between some of the workshops you guys have already familiar with and a civic assembly. We've done these before, most recently at the Neighborhood Congress I mentioned, and that one we did a fake city. So we used Harmony Heights and affordable housing. This one's going to be real for LA. So the recommendations aren't binding to any government, but it will give you a chance to really deliberate on an issue that's really, I think, on a lot of people in LA's minds. So
And do you want to mention the topic? Well, you
Yeah,
already have
so
it. Sorry, it's on the slide. Yeah.
it's on the slide, but the topic is about guiding LA's wildfire response prevention. So we'll have some experts come in, some deliberation, and then the end will be recommendations. So yeah, so reach out if you have any questions. I'll put my email in the chat as well, and hope to see as many of you there as can go.
And the last thing, I think most of you are familiar with Braver Angels, but if you just want to show the QR code, if you're not a member of Braver Angels, please join. You'll hear more about civic assemblies through us as well, and you'll also learn about, our different workshops and other kinds of discussions that we have. It's $12 a year, $1 a month, so it's the best bargain in the country right now. No inflation has hit Braver Angels yet. And with that, unless anybody has any other ending remarks, I will close out this meeting. Really appreciate your attendance and the great questions you had and your interest and enthusiasm about this. We're really excited about moving forward.
Thank you very much. And please, the folks from Los Angeles, keep us posted about how it's going on and
Very good.
what is your experience? Yeah.
All right. Well, good night, everyone. I don't know, Alex and Wayne and Michelle, do you want to just stay on for a couple of minutes afterwards?
Yeah, that'd be great.
Thanks again, everybody.
Thanks.
We'll be in
And
touch.
Susan.
Thank you.
Yeah. Scott, yeah, if you want to hang on to.
I think Scott just disappeared.
He's there. I
Oh, is he
still
there?
see.
Oh, he disappeared from my screen, but he's
George
still-
is a PDLA also. I don't know if
Right.
he's purposely hanging out, but just
Yes.
so you know, lurking.
He can selectively disappear.
And
I don't
So
think-
are George and Patrick are with you guys?
Yeah, George and Patrick are with us.
I'd hang out if it's okay.
Yeah,
That's fine. Yeah.
probably don't need to spotlight us anymore.
Yeah, right now we
I'm
have,
looking at myself and watching the lights go off behind me.
yeah, we can undo the spotlight. We have Elizabeth, Dana, Patrick, George. Elizabeth and Dana, are they with you also? Okay. Elizabeth and Dana, I'm going to put you in the waiting room if you don't mind. Whoop, Elizabeth just disappeared on her own.
She's waiting for the answer. Maybe
She was waiting for an answer in chat, which I just typed in.
Okay.
that.
And then Dana, also going to put Dana in the waiting room unless Dana is part of your team. No. Okay. So we now have Susan, Wayne, Scott, Michelle, George, Alex, and me.
I'm gonna stop the
Um,
recording.
Yes, we can stop recording and